The first generation in 1996, Pokémon Red, Green, Blue was released. Pokémon Yellow was released. As a continuation to Red and Green, Fire Red and Leaf Green was released in 2004. By the year 2018, Pokémon Yellow was remade, titled Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. In the second generation, 1999, Pokémon Gold and Silver was released, and 1 year later, in 2000, Pokémon Crystal was released. As a continuation to Gold and Silver, Heart Gold and Soul Silver was released in 2009. The third generation of 2002, Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire were released, and 2 years later in 2004, Pokémon Emerald was released. As a continuation to Ruby and Sapphire, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire was released in 2014. Following the fourth generation of 2006, Pokémon Diamond and Pearl was released, and 2 years later, in 2008, Pokémon Platinum was released. The fifth generation of 2010, Pokémon Black and White was released, and 2 years later, in 2012, Pokémon Black 2 and White 2 was released. Coming to the sixth generation of 2013, Pokémon X and Y was released. Passing to the seventh generation of 2016, Pokémon Sun and Moon was released, and 1 year later, in 2017, Pokémon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon was released. By the eighth generation of 2019, Pokémon Sword and Shield was released. In 2020, the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra was released. Then in 2021, Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl was released, and 1 year later, in 2022, Pokémon Legends of Arceus was released. To the most current generation of Pokémon, Generation 9 of 2022, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet was released, and 1 year later, in 2023, Pokémon Teal Mask and Indigo Disc was released. By the year 2025, Pokémon will release Legends ZA, which is a sequel to Legends of Arceus. Hey You Pikachu is a virtual pet Pokémon spin-off video game for the Nintendo 64 and was published by Nintendo. It was released in Japan on December 12th, 1998, and in North America on November 6th of the year 2000. The player is asked to help Professor Oak test the Poke Helper, a device that lets humans communicate with Pokemon. The game is set in the Kanto region between Pewter City and Viridian City, where the player is introduced to a wild Pikachu. The player is able to communicate with a 256-word database through the Voice Recognition Unit, VRU, a Nintendo 64 hardware accessory that, when paired with the microphone, can comprehend and analyze human speech. Along with speaking with Pikachu, the VRU allows the player to move around and gather items. Pokémon Snap is a 1999 first-person photography game with rail shooter style gameplay mechanics and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. It was first released in Japan in March 1999 and was later released in July 1999 in North America and in September 2000 for PAL regions. It is a spin-off game in the Pokémon series, being one of the first console-based games for it, and featuring many Pokémon rendered for the first time in real-time 3D. The game was re-released for the Wii's Virtual Console in December 2007, for the Wii U's Virtual Console in 2016, and for the Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pack in June of 2022. Pokémon Stadium is a strategy video game developed and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. It was released in Japan on April 30th, 1999, North America on March 6, 2000, in Australia on March 23rd, 2000, and in Europe on April 7th, 2000. It was the first Stadium title released in Western regions, succeeding the Japan-only 1998 Nintendo 64 release Pocket Monsters Stadium. The gameplay revolves around a 3D turn-based battling system using the 151 Pokemon from the Game Boy games Pokémon Red, Pokémon Blue, and Yellow.
What'll it do? A decent hit! There's a big difference in HP. Earthquake! That's a good hit! Oh! It's down!
Pokémon Stadium 2 is a strategy video game developed and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. It features all 251 Pokemon from the first and second generations of the franchise. It was released in Japan on December 14th, 2000, in North America on March 26th, 2001, and in Europe on October 10th, 2001. In Western regions, it was titled Pokémon Stadium 2, and it was the second Stadium game to be released outside Japan, in which it was the third game in the series. Pokémon Puzzle League is a puzzle video game in the Puzzle League series developed by Nintendo Software Technology and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. Released in North America on September 25th, 2000, and in Europe on March 2nd, 2001, its Puzzle League-based gameplay has a focus on puzzle-based strategy in the game's grid-based format. To advance to new levels, players are required to combat the game's trainers and gym leaders.